I didn't wanna, Lenny cried. I didn't want to hurt him, Slim said. Carlson, you get the candy wagon hitched up. We'll take him into Soledad and get him fixed up. Carlson hurried out. Slim turned to the whimpering Lenny. It ain't your fault, he said. This punk sure had it coming to him, but Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left. Slim hurried out and in a moment returned with a tin cup of water. He held it to Curly's lips. George said, Slim, we got canned now. We need the steak. Will Curly's old man can us now? Slim smiled wearily. He knelt down beside Curly. You got your senses in hand enough to listen? He asked. Curly nodded. Well, then listen. Slim went on. I think you got your hand caught in a machine. If you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just tell and try to get this guy canned, and we'll tell everybody, and then you will get the laugh. I won't tell, said Curly. He avoided looking at Lenny. Buggy wheels sounded outside. Slim helped Curly up. Come on now. Carlson's gonna take you to the doctor. He helped Curly out the door. The sound of wheels drew away. In a moment, Slim came back into the bunkhouse. He looked at Lenny, still crouched fearfully against the wall. Let's see your hands, he asked. Lenny stuck out his hands. Christ almighty, I have to tell you, mad at me, Slim said. I hate to have you mad at me, Slim said. George broke in. Lenny was just scared, he explained. He didn't know what to do. I told you nobody ought never to fight him. No, I guess it was Candy I told. Candy nodded solemnly. That's just what you done, he said. Right this morning when Curly first lit into your friend, you says, he better not fool with Lenny if he knows what's good for him. That's just what Hugh says to me. George turned to Lenny. It ain't your fault, he said. You don't need to be scared no more. You done just what I told you to do. Maybe you better go in the washroom and clean up your face. You look like hell. Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. I didn't want no trouble, he said. He walked toward the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. George? What you want? I could still tend the rabbits, George? Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong. I didn't mean to harm, George. Well, get the hell out of your get the hell out and wash your face. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On the other side of the room there was a square-foot pan window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crook's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended. Strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench of leather working stools, curved knives and needles and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with a horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. That sucks. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books, too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of California's Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from the nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept and fairly neat, for Crook was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people kept theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pained, tightened lips which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth camping on hay, of the rattle of shelter chains. In the stable Buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crook sat on the bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans in back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment, Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes, he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come into my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what your room means. Lenny gulped, and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on, get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunk, and you ain't wanting in my room." Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, you all stink to me." Oof. Well, Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody wants to stay in town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in any trouble. I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and set." Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in a barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. They's no call for a bucker to come into a barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I came to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup, then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and backed to the door again. "I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much." Crooks said, "Well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady won't move and someplace else." "I wonder why the old lady don't move him and put him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She let me." Lenny had moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and set a while," Crooks said. "Long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down." His tone was a little more friendlier. "All the boys gone into town, huh?" "All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring." Crooks adjusted his glasses. "Figuring? What's Candy figuring about?" Lenny almost shouted. "About the rabbits!" You're nuts, said Crooks. You're as crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about? The rabbits we're gonna get to tend to them and cut grass and give them water and that and like that. Just nuts, said Crooks. I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight. Lenny said quietly, it ain't no lie. We're gonna do it. Gonna get a little place and live on the fat of the land. Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. Sit down, he invited. Sit down on the nail keg. Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. You think it's a lie? Lenny said. But it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George. Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. You travel around with George, don't you? Sure. Me and him goes every place together. Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talking and you don't know what the hell he's talking about? Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them, and some of them were pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till later why he didn't like that. But I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't enough colored family for miles around. And now that there ain't a colored man on this ranch and there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why it's just an N-word thing saying it. Oh, it's just an N-word saying it. Lenny asked, how long you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't be babbling. Couple of weeks and them pups will be alright. George knows what he's talking about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just an N-word talking and a bastard, a busted back end. So I won't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I seen it all over. A guy talking to another guy, and it didn't make no difference if he didn't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, or they're setting, still not talking. It don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. That's all. He paused. His voice grew soft and persuasive. S'pose George don't come back no more. S'pose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What do you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, s'pose George went into town tonight, and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward, some kind of private victory. Just s'pose that, he repeated.